Well, hey guys, and welcome back to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul, Season 3, Episode 8, Slip. And if the title didn't give it away for you, Slip and Jimmy's back in the house. Okay, so, Slip and Jimmy. Let's talk about this. Episode opens with Jimmy and Marco flashback back to the good old days when Marco was still alive, and they are breaking into the old shop that Jimmy's parents used to own. If you've been paying attention to Better Call Saul, you know that his dad wasn't a great manager. He kind of listened to every sob story and helped everybody out, and nobody ever helped him out, and Jimmy also kind of was taking money from the till, and Chuck thinks that it's all Jimmy's fault. It's at least partially Jimmy's fault. Here we are in the aftermath of that. Still relatively ancient history for these characters. It seems like the way they talk about it that this place has been gone for a while, that Jimmy's dad has been dead for a good little while. But it's boarded up and there's still something there for them to get. They're coming in to steal some coins. I say steal some coins. It's stuff that Jimmy had stolen already and then stowed away in the ceiling panel, and then now it's not his place anymore. So him and Marco are just in this space, and it's a really kind of basic setup for one of our intros. You know, it's probably on a soundstage. I mean, I would bet like 99% on a soundstage. They never go outside. They're just, you know, in this room sort of reminiscing, talking about the past. And so from a production standpoint, there's nothing particularly exciting about this, except that the lighting is pretty nice with the flashlight, I will say. Really enjoyed the way the scene looked with Jimmy just holding the flashlight and kind of lighting things up. But the meat of the scene is about how Jimmy feels about his dad and about the past and about what caused this place to be run into the ground. And Marco is very fondly remembering Jimmy's dad. He says, man, it's a shame your dad lost it. You know, he was such a great manager of this place. Everybody loved him. And Jimmy is coming at it from a totally different perspective. Jimmy's bitter, essentially. And some of that, I think, is genuine. I think some of that is the fact that he looks at his dad as a failure and sees that he wasn't savvy enough. He says at the end of the scene, he didn't do what he had to do. And that's a very telling quote. However, the other side of that, I think, is that Jimmy feels some level of guilt for what has happened to his dad's old shop. And he's trying to work through it. He's trying to place the blame somewhere else. But I think that somewhere in his heart, he knows the thing that Chuck knows, that he at least partially contributed to the closure, and he's running as far away from that as he possibly can. After the cold open, we get Mike in the desert. How many times have we had Mike in the desert? It's a lot. Mike goes to the desert a lot, and it's never something to complain about. Mike, for some reason, gets like 90% of the good montages in this show. Especially this season. I think there's been at least 2 or 3 already, most notably the teardown scene in the junkyard. And here we have him out in the desert. You know, he sort of walks out from his car, he stakes down a stake, he knows generally where he wants to be looking, but he's using a metal detector. We don't know for what. Again, like many of these Mike scenes, they just sort of throw us in and let us figure it out as the scene plays out. But I did so love that overhead shot. I don't know. I'm thinking about it just from a production standpoint, as someone who on a very limited basis works with video a lot, okay, and works with live action video somewhat frequently. Color correction sucks. And to think that they were able to shoot all of that, get Mike in all of those locations with the shadow cast, and the background stays the same. I'm telling you guys, as an effects shot, and granted, I am not amazing, but that was more than just locking the camera to a crane and shooting down without moving. Like, There are subtle variations in light all the time, unless they manage to do that on a soundstage somehow, on some giant soundstage, which I doubt. That was well, even that would have been impressive. It's just impressive in a different direction than I'm thinking. I'm really looking forward to the Insider podcast, the Better Call Saul Insider podcast, where they talk about this stuff, because I really want to hear what Vince Gilligan says about that shot. And the upshot of that particular scene is that Mike finds a body. And I wasn't sure what the body was until I went and read what other people were saying. And apparently the assumption here is that this is the Good Samaritan. And he got the coordinates from Nacho a ways back and is sort of trying to put right what has gone wrong as best he can. And that theme is continuing throughout this episode for Mike, but he's not the main focus, because next up we get a scene with Chuck and Dr. Cruz, who I was surprised to see is handling Chuck's recovery. I mean, she was like a supervising physician in the ER, or maybe in the OR. Like she's here helping Chuck through his mental instability, and that to me seems like not her forte. I don't know why she's qualified to do this. I'm not trying to like throw any shade or anything, but I would have thought that Chuck would have gotten like a real full-blown psychologist or psychiatrist or whichever one it is, and yet here he is with her. Maybe there's just the familiarity factor. Maybe he doesn't want anybody else knowing, and he knows that she knows about his condition already. That's possible. But she's talking about his pain management, and he's very optimistic. He has these numbers written down. He says, listen, the pain's going away. You know, it's still there. It's still real for me, but I'm going to beat it. And she has doubts. And you can see them setting up what is going to be going forward for these people, because Chuck, I don't think he doesn't want to stop. She's saying several years maybe it's going to take before you're ready, and he's ready for it to happen now. And you see the sort of the desperateness in his eyes of being humiliated in the courtroom as he was. And also the honesty, I thought, was very impressive, where he said, listen, it's real to me as anything, but I was proven that it was in my head. Like, there's no way I can get around the idea that it at least very likely is just a mental condition, so I need to address that head on. And it brings me back to a question I had at the time, which is Jimmy in the process of humiliating Chuck, and admittedly doing it to extricate himself too, but is he in this process also creating a much more formidable foe by taking out Chuck's disability? I don't know. I mean, clearly the disability is still going to, the mental disability is still going to play into Chuck as a character, but he's got some of the reins now off, at least. Next up, we get Jimmy trying to close the deal on his the music store commercial that he shot. The store's buzzing. It wasn't anybody in there the first time we saw him. Now there's people in there. Isn't that great? Jimmy, good job. You got the commercial. You're getting people in, except music store owner guys call up the station, find out how much it costs to run a commercial, and they say, hey, we can get our own film students. Why do we need you? Why do we got to pay you this $7,000 to run a commercial for us? Light bulb, we don't. Despite the fact they had to deal with this guy, despite the fact that he opened up possibilities to them that they did not realize existed, they're going to back out now. They're going to be all not cool. Super not cool is the upshot of that. And Jimmy, as I mentioned before, Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, Slippin' Jimmy makes a return. Makes sure he gets it all on tape. Drops that drumstick on the floor. Hey guys, can we renegotiate? No. Oh, no, I'm on the ground. My back. Oh. You guys have accident insurance, right? I said at the end of the last episode that I'm not on board with Jimmy here. I don't or maybe it was the episode before, his vendetta against Chuck and his lack of morals has turned me off to being able to sympathize with him as a character. However, he's getting to be fun in an unsympathetic way. And I am enjoying that immensely. I don't defend Jimmy here at all. I mean, I get 100% why he did it. Their showrunners here are great at putting people in the vice grip and making them feel like they don't have another choice, and they make a morally questionable choice. But Jimmy's just grabbing onto it with both hands now. He does not care. He will do the slip and Jimmy thing. He's not afraid to make Chuck sad anymore. And that is a great return for that character. I love it. I love it. I love it to death. I don't support it. Do not support where this character is going. But this is we're so much seeing the seeds of Saul Goodman growing into the beautiful tree that we know they will be someday soon. Next up, we have Kim in a meeting with Mesa Verde. And the big head honcho over there at Mesa Verde wants her to take on an extra client. And as we know, Kim is essentially swamped. All right. She's basically living at the office. She's changing at the office. We're reminded of that again in this episode. Not like in a big way, but Jimmy mentions it offhand. She does not have any free time, but she doesn't want to make the big boss mad. So she kind of accepts to at least look into the case and refer this person to somewhere else. And in the process of this happening, Howard walks by. Howard's at the restaurant doing damage control with all of his clients after they all found that Chuck was a nutcase. Because people don't want to be represented by a nutcase. And Howard's trying to put all that back together. And he just happens to swing by Kim's table and says, "Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, great lawyer, Kim. I know because we paid for her law school. And we promoted her from the mailroom and mentored her and gave her everything she has in her life. And now she's working for you when we should have had your business. Hi, guys. Well, see ya." That's essentially how that scene plays out. And Kim kind of takes the bait. Like, she is really rattled by this. And I think upset a little bit too. Upset in the sense that she's angry. And so she gets up, she writes a check for the amount of her law school and hands it to Howard and says, "Listen, I don't owe you anything. Buzz off, dude." And later on in the scene, Howard comes back to her and he says, "Listen, it's not just about the money. Like, we invested in you in our time and you stabbed us in the back." And Kim defends herself in a way that is logical, right? I think especially fans of the show and fans of Jimmy would say the same things that Kim would say. But as someone who... I have my problems with Chuck, okay? Chuck sucks most of the time. But I am really not at any point willing to let Jimmy off the hook for everything that he's done. And look on him as some kind of saint. And she's defending actions that she herself is not comfortable with in any way. And she's throwing up these platitudes, and, you know, Howard throws it back in her face, rips up the check, and she drives off. But it's interesting seeing Kim kind of trying to put up this front, essentially be Jimmy, right? She's trying to emote what Jimmy would say, but it's not coming from her heart. She's trying to defend herself, and it's understandable, but she, I think, is really conflicted about what she's done. And there's a ring of truth in what Howard is saying to her that really eats at her a little bit. Next up, we have Nacho, who, in this episode at least, gets the award for best acting, because here he is, especially in the scene that's coming up, but even here, he's putting his plan into action. He's counterfeiting these pills. He's grinding up ibuprofen and putting it into these capsules, and you really see the weight of what he has to do and what all of the problems that he's facing resting on his shoulders here. And he's not ready to do this. He's not skillful like Mike. He has a plan, but it's kind of a crappy plan, and he's not real good at executing it. You see him practicing dropping the pill bottle into the coat several times, and you think, dude, you're not good at this. But then his dad comes in and really just pounds that nail home of exactly what Nacho is up against. And Nacho is up against some crap. And if he wants to keep his dad safe, he's going to have to go through with this, whether he's comfortable with it or not. And I get Michael, I forget what his last name is, but the actor that plays Nacho is fantastic in this episode. He always has been, but earlier in the seasons, you could kind of say, well, he's just muscle, right? How hard is that to play? And there always was some nuance there anyway, but the nuance is getting so much deeper as they put so much more pressure on him. It's wonderful to see what this character is going through. We follow that up with Chuck in the supermarket. Clearly, he's made some big strides in his treatment, let's say, but he's still also got some way to go. And I love the way he was processing things here. It calls back to the earlier scene with the doctor where he talked about the things that are real and how the electricity illness was real to him, as real as anything. And here he is calling out colors and names of things. In my mind, and I'm not a psychologist, or I don't know exactly what the reasons here would be, but I read this as him sort of essentially putting his hand on the banister of reality and reassuring himself that there were still real things and that the electricity thing was not one of them. And he's in the store. It's very difficult for him. And the scene climaxes with him sort of in this row of freezers, and they're all got that wonderful fluorescent light just sort of buzzing out of them. And he's got this long walk to make it to the soy milk, and he's going, and there's the buzz crescendos, and the scene cuts. And you think, you're left with the question, right? You're left wondering, what happened? Did he fall? Maybe he fell, maybe he didn't. It doesn't give us the answer until a little bit later in the episode. But before we get to that, we have Kim finding Jimmy on the floor of his office with a brand new guitar, picking out Smoke on the Water, and he has the money now to pay her for his half of the rent. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, Slippin' Jimmy. I'm all excited about that. I already said all that. But I think that this is a good point to mention what I felt like was the through line of this episode, because there are several points in this episode where there are people trying to pay back something, and the financial debt is not what's really important here. We saw it earlier with Kim paying back Howard for her law school and him tearing up the check. We have it here with Jimmy paying back Kim for the rent for the month. And in both of these scenes, the actual money being exchanged is not the point. For Kim, she's concerned about Jimmy. She wants him to take it easy. She's worried he's going off the deep end. And she does end up taking the money, and I think partly because of what she went through with Howard earlier. But you can tell that she's uncomfortable with it, and so uncomfortable and so unsure of what Jimmy's going to do that she goes back to the client that she was going to hand off to a different law firm and says, "Hey, I can take you on. I got you." Yeah, bad move, Kim. Bad move. You're already literally up to your eyelids in paperwork and problems with Mesa Verde. I mean, not that it's a problem, but no. You need to calm it down. Calm it down, Kim. This is not a good idea. But she feels an obligation, so here she is helping out with Jimmy's problems, and I'm worried. I'm really worried about Kim snapping under this stress. She's got as I mentioned earlier, this show is so great of just putting these characters in a vice grip and just turn and turn and turn little bit by little bit as they progress through. And Kim is at the breaking point or very close to it. Yeah. I'm very nervous about her. One of my favorite characters in the show. I think bad things are coming. I think bad things are coming for Kim. But to wrap things up with the Chuck scenario earlier, we find him strolling down the street, happy as can be. Apparently he got his soy milk, or abandoned the soy milk and decided something else would be fine. But he didn't faint. He didn't pass out. He's not bloody or bump on his head or anything like that. He's whistling down the street, and Howard's amazed to see him. He says, listen, I've been waiting for you. Thought you were asleep or something. And he says, nope, I'm good. I'm all good. He has great news. But Howard does not. Here comes the other shoe dropping from Jimmy's shenanigans in the last episode. And we don't get to see this conversation. And maybe we will in a future episode. But I suspect that they can play it in such a way that we just know this malpractice insurance thing, it's a big deal. We're going to see what the fallout is at some point. But for right now, we just know that Chuck knows. And whatever is, the wheels are now in motion. Is that going to set him back in his healing? That's hard to say. I know the title of the final episode of the season is Lantern, which means Chuck's probably not back using electricity at that point. Maybe. It's hard to tell. There are a lot of people very excited about this Lantern episode, guys. And I don't know what's going to entail. But, you know, it seems to portend something pretty big with Chuck. And we know that Chuck's condition is based on this psychological stress. If he's having even more of that due to this malpractice insurance problem, we could see another spiral. I don't know. I really like the idea of a Chuck that's getting better. Just because of the problems that presents for Jimmy. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. The next scene is, I would say, like, at least the best one this season as far as tension goes. Maybe the best one of the show. And it's really telling that we don't have any of the quote-unquote main characters. Maybe Hector is the main character, but you know what I'm saying. We sort of have the B list over here doing their thing, and Nacho trying to work up the courage to make this switch. He sets it up with the AC. That was a smart move. I didn't understand what that was about at the time until I saw Hector take off his coat, and I said, that's a smart move, Nacho. You got the smart writer's room behind you. All the characters in the show are smart, except for Price. He's your moron, Price. But all of our main characters are people that you want to watch, even when they're not exactly great at what they're doing. And Nacho's not great at this. He is not Cool Hand Luke. He's like, shaky hand Nacho. And he's counting the money. We see Crazy 8 again. You know, Crazy 8 gets off okay this time, doesn't need a beating, which is, you know, I'm sure that would have been even extra pressure for Nacho. It's really, the interesting thing is nothing really happens in this scene, right? I mean, you could have just, this could have been a 5-second thing of like Nacho reaching into a pocket, pulling out, putting the thing back. We're good. Like, you wouldn't have even had to set it up. Like, the visual storytelling medium would have let you just skirt right past this. But the tension that they build with Nacho and the shaking hands and the like counting out the pills so that it's equal is impeccable. What a great scene. It's, I was blown away with it. One of the tensest things that I've seen from this show and really from any television in a while. I'm thinking back to like maybe Nightcrawler or something, like just giving you that level of like, oh boy, what if something bad happens? Nope, I gotta look. I can't look. No, some other bad thing. You just think of like and you can see Nacho thinking of all the negative things, all the bad possibilities, all the ways this could go wrong. It does not go wrong. Although there was something about the way they shot. They kept cutting to or having the guy in the background flipping the burgers. And there's it could be completely wrong, but without any further information, there's a little perverse part of my brain that says, you could have saw something. He could have some suspicions. You know, Nacho wasn't so smooth with this that guy couldn't have possibly seen anything. So we'll have to wait. That may be completely off base, but I thought that some of the camera angles were interesting in the way that they kind of made me paranoid about that guy anyway. It might have just been for the effect. He might not have seen anything at all. We'll have to wait and see. In the next scene, the return of Slippin' Jimmy and indeed his alter ego, the great superhero Saul Goodman, is in full force because Jimmy is making a deal with the drug dealer to get him out of his community service. By the way, complete bluff here, 100%. If anybody was like thinking maybe he could actually do that, don't forget, Jimmy cannot practice law. He cannot go into a courtroom and practice law, but this guy doesn't know that. And Jimmy threatens his overseer with personal lawsuit and says, I'll tie this up. It doesn't matter whether I win or not. I'm already a lawyer. I can handle being in court, and you will be out a lot of money and time. And it's scary enough for the guy that he lets Jimmy keep kicking back. He lets the drug dealer go to visit his daughter in the hospital. And Jimmy gets paid. Gets that paper right out of that drug dealer's sock. And somebody pointed out, this is not my original thought, by the way. I read this on Reddit. One of the commenters pointed out that it's an interesting juxtaposition between the drug dealer, the scum of the earth, criminal, doing community service, all that jazz, and these two music store owners, because they're really in the same position. Even the drug dealer even in a shakier position because he doesn't have to pay Jimmy at this point. He's probably got people who could beat Jimmy up. He probably could just walk off and Jimmy be like, hey man, give me the money you promised. Be like, sorry bro, peace. But he doesn't do that. I would say, and interestingly, because maybe he's more of a man of his word than the upstanding music store owner citizens are. But also maybe because he sees a potential in Jimmy as a tool and doesn't want to burn that bridge. We don't get anywhere near that kind of detail in his thought process. It's not like we have some big close-up on him where he's considering walking off and doesn't. But I thought that was an interesting moment, that Jimmy gets paid and has a better time working with criminals than he does with honest people, because the criminals will at least do what they said they would do. Speaking of criminals, we wrap this out with... I'm very excited about this return of Slippin' Jimmy, but this is a moment that is almost as exciting as that. Mike has a lot of money from, I guess he stole it from Hector Salamanca in his heist, and it's just sitting there because it's dirty money, and he can't do anything with it. Like, it's $200,000. He knows that he's living a life kind of on the edge, has got some problems, and he wants to make sure that if something happens to him, you can fill in the blank what might happen to Mike, about possibly getting shot by a crazed, balding drug dealer. But if something happens to him, he wants this money to go to his daughter-in-law and his granddaughter. And he goes to Gus and says, listen, I know you got we're sitting in your money laundering outfit, bud. I know for a fact that you're handling this money that you're getting from drugs through this chicken joint. Can you help me out? And Gus says, well, I can, but it'll be complicated. And Mike offers him, he says, listen, will 20% take care of that complication? And I love this exchange because Gus says, oh, I wouldn't take your money. And on the one hand, I saw some people talking about like, oh man, look, Gus is being pretty generous here. You know, he knows that Mike is going to owe him a favor back and everything. But honestly, I think it's Gus saying, I want something from you that's way more valuable to me than like $40,000. Okay. I want, and he gets it. Him and Mike do the handshake. Now it's not like we haven't cemented down in plot. They could back off on this a little bit and say, well, Mike doesn't want to work for him anymore. We don't know that he has a specific contract with Mike yet, but we're very much closer to the state of things as we find them in Breaking Bad, with Mike working for Gus all the time, sort of being his on-call hitman / fixer. And that is interesting. Some interesting stuff. It puts some pieces into place, and it makes me happy that it feels like they have an end game in mind here. Maybe 2 more seasons, and I feel like they'll probably be done with this story and really have Saul Goodman where they want him. Maybe only 1. I mean, I think they could easily do it in just 1 more season, but we're coming to the end of this one. It was nice to have the little break, but now we're back in full force. We're now down to 2 more episodes after this. Big things on the horizon. So much stuff is just getting cranked into the smaller space that it can fit. We're fit for an explosion here, guys. Possibly literally. I don't know, but I can't wait to find out. As always, thank you for watching. If you like the video, click that like button. There's also the other one that goes in the other direction. If you have any comments, leave those. I always love hearing what you guys think about the episode, and if I've missed something or if I've mischaracterized, because believe me, that does happen. And I will see you guys next week with another episode of the Better Call Saul recap. Take care, guys.